Harry Yoon is the editor of Minari, the new film starring Stephen Yun that is gaining major awards attention. I'm Kevin Jacobsen of Gold Derby here with Harry. And I wanted to just start at the beginning. What did you most connect with about the script that just made you want to be a part of the film?
Well, I feel like I was kind of born to edit this movie because so much of my personal experience resonated when I read the script. I am a child of immigrants, Korean American immigrants, who were both small business owners, and uh, we grew up in the '80s, just like the family on screen did, and so every scene that I read was like a little explosion of memory for me. And like David, I was not kind to my grandmother when she visited from Korea too, and so it also sort of opened up a little bit of guilt too, and I feel a little like there was a kind of active redemption in editing this movie. I think that parallels Isaac's own sort of desire to find redemption and meaning in his childhood.
Yeah, I believe this is your first time working with Lee Isaac Chung. Was there anything specific that he wanted from the editing that you knew up front from the beginning before you even got started?
Well, what really struck me was how open and collaborative that Isaac was from the start. Um, you meet a wide range of writer directors, particularly as you work on independent films, and they're all in at different stages of being comfortable with kind of opening up and allowing you to be a true collaborator in their work. But Isaac, from the get-go, as we were talking about the script, was really open to the suggestions that I had, and I think it's because we had so much common ground from the start. Having grown up as Korean American immigrants, in parallel lives. And so once he got into the cutting room, we had already established a tremendous level of trust. And these are his memories. So every memory is precious to him. And so I think we needed to have that trust to sort of start to shape the movie from the collection of memories that it was into the kind of necessary and intimate feeling story that ultimately we arrived at.
And another big part of the film is just the music. And I was reading that Emile Mosseri, who wrote the music for the film, actually sent you a few tracks before you got started, which is quite rare. How did that kind of inform your own work and your process when you were working with the footage?
Tremendously. I think I recall Isaac telling me that he would sometimes listen to Emile's music as he was driving to the set. And I think that that just gives you a sense of how spot on Emile's sense of the sweep, the tone, the romanticism, the sense of reverie that this film was trying to communicate. And that sort of entered into both of our DNAs as we listened to the music early on. And as you said, it's so rare to have the composer to be able to truly, collaborate. Because by the time most composers start to work, like a lot of it's been temped out, a lot of the kind of key creative decisions and the rules of music has been sort of modeled already. But Emile played a very sort of formative role early on. And I remember just playing around with setting some of the early scenes to his music just to see if there was a symbiosis going on, and it was just so perfect and beautiful. And it actually inspired me to cut together a little montage at the end of production to send to the crew to as a little thank you gift for all the hard work that they'd done. And I heard that like not a dry eye was in the house, and I think it's just a testament to how good Emile's music was in capturing the mood of what we wanted for the film.
Yeah, well, kind of speaking of that, there are actually a number of sequences in the film that don't have dialogue that are just montages where all we really hear is the score, like at the in the beginning in the car with the family, and also another point when they're like cultivating the farm. And there's something very calming and just sensitive about the tone of those sequences. Can you talk about putting those kinds of scenes together?
I have to say that that was one of the most enjoyable parts of the film, because I think it was a chance for us to communicate the family's subjective experience in those moments. David's experience of, you know, excitement, but also a little bit of fear as he goes to a totally different locale from Los Angeles to the Ozarks. Um, Jacob's sense of incredible optimism and joy in seeing the beginnings of his dream start to emerge, paralleled with the children exploring this kind of natural wonderland. And you know, I mean, I think you definitely see like elements of Malik and things like that in there, but I think it's because it sort of is it is it's akin to the kind of myth making, the kind of sort of mythical, sort of otherworldly, out of the commonplace feel of his films that feels very appropriate for that moment. And so it was so fun to put together, just capturing just those little moments and no more, to not indulge necessarily, but to feel the essential of what each family member is feeling in those moments. It was, yeah, it was one of the best parts of editing the film.
Mm. And the arrival of the grandmother really shifts things into a new gear, you know?
Yeah,
And even though the film has some elements of comedy and lightness before that,
yeah,
she has a lot of the more broadly comedic moments in the film.
yeah.
Was that kind of a challenge for you to make her scenes feel of a piece with the rest of the film?
That's a great question. No, I feel like they're as unexpected a grandmother as she is. I think having grown up in the Korean American community, that kind of strong woman who, even though from a societal standpoint, she doesn't have necessarily like political power, always had incredible power within the household. You know, that kind of strength and almost a rebellious streak that existed within her is not unfamiliar to a lot of folks who met women of that era. I mean, you have to remember these are women that had to survive war and the aftermath, and sometimes have to raise huge families single-handedly. My own grandmother raised 7 boys on her own after the Korean War, and so that kind of pluck, that kind of resilience, and almost a kind of countercultural rebelliousness is something that was familiar to me. And so that's why I, going back to what I said earlier, is just, I feel like there was a way that I could find true north in sort of establishing these characters with Isaac, because I had lived out so many of these experiences in a personal way that sometimes I have to more abstractly or intellectually approach in other projects. And so this was just a true pleasure to try to bring all of that true sense together.
And I would say that the film is pretty well balanced with the different perspectives of
Thank you.
David and also his parents. I'm curious just from the script and the footage if there was even more of a focus one way or the other in those earlier stages.
There was, and I think that was what the crafting of the film was. Certainly, it was to feel like, even though we only had a 25-day shoot, to feel like we got everything we needed. And so to cut the scenes in such a way where you didn't feel like, oh, they didn't have time to get this coverage and things like that. So I hope that that comes across. But I think more than that, it was this sense of how do we take this collection of memories and form them into a story and an experience where everything feels essential. And so, yes, there were additional moments with every single one of the characters, and even the peripheral characters, that we like cut by cut started to winnow down so that we got to that place where everything felt essential. And what was magical about it was that when we got to that very sort of muscular place with the cut, scenes started to speak to each other, little accidental moments where the experience of like the son resonated with the mother resonated with the father, etc. And so there's a kind of dialogue going on visually and emotionally between the scenes that contributed to the sense that this is the family story. And so that's where I feel like the magic finally happened after we winnowed away the scenes that were kind of a buffer between those things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that must be such a great experience when everything seems to come together and sort of fit in a way.
Completely. I think one of the things that sort of fascinates me conceptually is like the boxes of Joseph Cornell, where he collects an assemblage of like all of these disparate elements, like a paper cutout or a piece of string or a ball of wood or something like that. Yet everything in that diorama feels essential. Like, and they kind of have this kind of conversation that evokes an emotion in you. And I feel like we got to that place with this movie, and as an editor, like you try to plan, you try to be as essential, you try to be as ordered as possible in your approach, but sometimes these happy accidents happen as you start to remove things, and it's kind of recognizing that, okay, now we can stop, now we've achieved that space. And I think that that was the process that Isaac and I really went through in crafting the film.
Well, there's a lot of coming of age stories out there and family stories, and I think some of them can be quite sentimental and sort of going for a cheap emotional response and maybe not really earning it, which I think this film avoids a lot of those traps.
Thank you. Thank you.
Is there something that you had is that something that you had in the back of your mind when you were editing as far as not going too over the top with the emotion of it all, you know?
It's interesting. There are scenes that tell you more, like in the middle of the film and actually near the end of the film, about what's happening to the characters either at the end or in the middle, um, that give you additional information. But it was interesting in removing those scenes, even though like I know that the audience and we would have wanted to spend more time with those characters. Ironically, it was sort of removing some of that, I think, that drew you closer. And I think that that desire to almost kind of like want to be with them longer, I hope, and I know this sounds optimistic, I think draws you in a way, and hopefully reminds you of how precious that time with these people that you love, this family that you love is, and reminds you to do the same with your own family. I talked to a lot of folks who watch the film, and they're like, oh, it made me want to call my grandmother, or it made me, want to revisit my old photo album. And I feel like when you don't linger too long, or when you don't add more um, to an experience that doesn't say something new, or actually, maybe the better way to say it is that when you leave a hole that sort of draws the audience to want to know more, I think it can create more of an emotional feeling than if you linger or give them more of what they want. Does that make sense?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's very true.
Mm.
And also, I wanted to touch on just the visual element. I don't know how much you might have altered just the visual look of the film, but there's a kind of a warm glow, especially in the outdoor scenes. I'm sure part of that was from the cinematography, obviously, but did you work with color grading or anything like that to just enhance some of those scenes?
Oh, definitely. I was part of that process. For me, the grading, my voice in the grading was to just take this beautiful palette that Lachlan Milne had already created, and just to make sure that we were focusing, particularly with techniques like vignetting and emphasizing the lighting on particular people, that we were directing the eye and the focus um, where the story needed to be at the time, or in sort of emphasizing those happy accidents, like I told you about. Um, like, for example, we removed a section of David's sleepover at his friend's house when so he's brushing his teeth, and then there's this lighting inside the bathroom, and there used to be stuff between that and when his mom is in the hospital with his grandmother. Spoiler alert, sorry about that. Um, but again, sort of once we put those together, making sure that there's a commonality of color that unites those two characters and those experiences, sort of the contrasting the joy of David with, the kind of mourning that Han Yeti's character is going through. And so little things like that, that as a result of editorial changes, we can then sort of speak through color to, again, keep the conversation going between the characters' experiences.
And I mean, the film is earning such acclaim from critics and earning all kinds of nominations and wins, especially for these great performances. When did it first hit you that this was a movie that was going to really connect with people?
I think it was in watching the dailies, and
Mm.
there's one scene early on in which Han Yeti's character, Monica, looks off screen at her grandmother, at her mother, and says, "It must have been so hard for you to travel so far." And there's so much in that line, not just from her own experience, but in the experience of all immigrants who often live apart from their parents or sometimes their children. And it just spoke so much to what that experience is like, that I just started crying. And I feel like, and I felt like, if we can keep this tone, if we can keep this truth happening through the film, then this is going to be like a gift to so many people who've had that experience. And so I'm just so happy that people are even if you're not an immigrant, that you're able to resonate with that feeling of like how precious family is.
Yeah, I certainly resonated with that very strongly. And I'm looking forward to seeing more people see the film and experience it for the first time. Thank you so much, Harry, for talking with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I really had a great time.
Yeah. And for those of you watching, hit like and subscribe for more interviews and head to goldderby.com to make your award show predictions.